People that have a home, but it's not meeting their needs, are wondering if they could ever find a place that's actually going to allow them to grow their family. Young people, people with jobs, people that have lower incomes, everyone is faced with a real struggle when it comes to housing. And then we look at some of the numbers. We know that over 3,000 people can't find a home at all. 40,000 plus have homes that are not meeting the needs of their size of their family or are just outside of their budget and they're barely getting by. We heard stories from people today that spend so much money on their rent that if you factor in rent and bills, they have so little money left over that they're skipping meals. One woman shared a story that she only eats one meal a day because she can't afford to eat more because the cost of housing is so much, it takes up so much of her income. And these aren't isolated stories. We had a couple that both were earning money. They both had decent jobs, but because of the housing market or the job market fluctuating, they're just getting to the point where they feel like they might start falling behind on their bills, and they're contemplating moving back with their parents. And they put it this way: they're over 40 years old, they got kids, and they don't want to have to move back to their parents, but that's what they're going to end up having to do. There's just so many stories like that. And what are we up against with this challenge? We've got a liberal government and Justin Trudeau, who's had 8 years to do something about this, and has rather focused on blaming or pointing fingers at other jurisdictions than taking responsibility and saying we're going to do something about it. It is absolutely something the federal government can play a significant role in tackling. It's not helpful for the prime minister to say, oh, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility. That's not helpful. And then we've got the leader of the Conservatives who's proposing doing the exact same thing that got us in this mess, putting more money in the pockets of rich developers, but not actually tackling the problem. And we know the track record of the Conservatives. The Harper Conservatives, where Pierre Poilievre was a chief cabinet minister, they made promises to invest in affordable housing and didn't do it. They broke their promises. We've seen their track record and we've seen their plan. They're not going to solve this problem. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we've got to build more homes. We've got to do it really quickly, but not just any old homes. We've got to build homes that are within people's budgets, homes that people can actually afford to buy, homes that people can actually afford to rent. We also need to keep what we have that's affordable and keep it affordable. And that's why we're proposing an acquisition fund to ensure that we can buy buildings that are affordable and affordable rents and keep them in the hands of the community. Have a fund that allows municipalities, community groups, not-for-profit organizations to buy those buildings and keep them affordable. When we're incentivizing building homes, we can waive GST and HST for buildings or for projects which are truly affordable. And finally, something that neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals are willing to talk about, we have to look at the housing market itself. The market has been designed to make rich investors richer, to make property flippers record profits, but it's not been designed to ensure that families can have a place to call home. And that means we need to focus on solutions that are outside the market. We need to look at non-market housing or community housing, housing that's built so someone can buy or rent that's not based on market prices, because so many people can't afford the market rents. They can't afford the market prices for homes. So we need to build homes that are outside of the market, that are not based on those prices that are just simply unaffordable. That's what New Democrats are committed to doing. We understand that people are faced with a serious challenge, and we are ready to provide serious solutions. We're not into the Liberals' approach of blaming other jurisdictions or the Conservatives who aren't going to tackle the real problem. We're going to say pretty words, but aren't committed to actually building non-market housing or housing that's truly affordable. We're here for you. We've got your back. And with MPs like Blake and Heather, Albertans can be rest assured that your voices will be heard in Ottawa, and we're going to be fighting really hard for you. Bon, merci. On est ici aujourd'hui pour parler avec les gens qui font face des grands défis à cause du logement. Et on a des solutions. On sait, après 8 ans des libéraux, ils n'ont pas agi pour régler ce problème, et les conservateurs, ils n'ont pas les solutions. Ce qu'ils proposent ne va pas réduire les coûts parce qu'ils proposent de faire les mêmes choses qui ont créé le problème. Nous avons une solution pour régler ce problème avec des investissements pour bâtir plus de logements abordables, pour garder ce qu'on a qui est abordable et pour construire du logement qui est hors du marché. With that, I'm ready for any questions that you might have, and I want to thank you again for being here.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Nous allons maintenant aller prendre des questions via Zoom. Alors, j'invite les membres des médias d'utiliser la fonction lever la main pour poser une question et une question de suivi. So we're now going to go to questions via Zoom. I will ask media to please use the raise hand function to ask a question and one follow-up. Nous allons commencer avec Valérie Michaela Baines avec Radio-Canada. La parole est à vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
Selon vous, qu'est-ce qui ne fonctionne pas avec la stratégie nationale pour le logement qui a récemment été bonifiée par le gouvernement fédéral?
Quelque chose. Premièrement, on a entendu le premier ministre qui était posé, qui a répondu aux questions des journalistes. Il a dit que ce n'est pas vraiment le travail du gouvernement fédéral de régler la crise du logement. Cette approche, c'est un problème parce que ça ne sert à rien. Si le gouvernement fédéral et si le premier ministre Justin Trudeau veut blâmer les autres qui ne veut pas prendre responsabilité, ça ne règle pas les problèmes. Donc, cette approche, c'est un problème. Cette approche, c'est une mauvaise approche. On doit reconnaître le pouvoir du gouvernement fédéral pour régler le problème de crise du logement. Oui, on doit travailler avec les provinces et les municipalités, mais le gouvernement fédéral a un grand pouvoir de régler la crise du logement. Et le fait que le premier ministre a dit que ce n'est pas notre travail, ça, c'est un problème. Deuxièmement, dans le dernier budget, le gouvernement fédéral a eu une opportunité de mettre de l'avant un programme, un plan de financement pour investir davantage, pour construire plus de logements ou pour changer les choses qui se passent maintenant, qui ne fonctionnent pas, et il n'a pas fait ça. Donc, ces deux sont les grands problèmes. Et dernièrement, le fait que ni les conservateurs ni les libéraux ont prêt de dire que le marché ne fonctionne pas pour monsieur, madame, tout le monde, et on a besoin des solutions qui sont hors du marché économique, ça veut dire du logement qui n'est pas basé sur les prix du marché. Et si vous avez un suivi...
Oui, excusez-moi, j'avais un problème avec mon bouton sourdine, je suis désolée. Alors, concrètement, dans ce cas-là, qu'est-ce que vous suggérez particulièrement? Ce qu'on constate, c'est que lorsqu'on construit, par exemple, du logement abordable pour les étudiants qui ne sont pas nécessairement des résidences, mais vraiment des logements pour étudiants, ça va libérer des logements qui sont déjà sur le marché, qui va faire en sorte que des familles ou peu importe, des gens seuls vont pouvoir accéder à ces logements-là. Ça apaise, disons, la question de taux d'inoccupation qui est vraiment très bas. Qu'est-ce que vous suggérez de faire pour qu'on accélère la construction de logements pour étudiants?
Je suis d'accord que c'est un élément de la solution. On a besoin de logements, particulièrement pour les étudiants. Ça, c'est un élément. Et ce qu'on peut faire, ce qu'on a suggéré pour encourager plus de construction, particulièrement pour le logement, c'est d'exempter la TPS pour les projets qui sont abordables. Donc, ça, c'est une façon de donner d'encouragement pour bâtir, pour construire plus de logements comme ça. Mais je dois aussi souligner, on a besoin d'une approche plus large. Ce n'est pas un élément seul qui contribue à ce problème. Ça, c'est pourquoi je dis qu'on a besoin aussi des investissements davantage pour bâtir plus du logement à but non lucratif. Ça, c'est un élément important. On doit souligner. Les autres parties ne sont pas prêtes à dire clairement qu'on a besoin du logement qui est à non-but lucratif. Ça, c'est important. Du logement coopératif, c'est une autre solution. On a besoin de plus de logements où les gens peuvent louer quelque chose qui est vraiment abordable et on doit encourager la construction de ce sort de logements aussi. Donc, il y a plusieurs éléments. On doit prendre la crise au sérieux et on doit agir rapidement.
We are going to go back in person. I see that there is a question in person, and then we'll come back to Zoom. Please go ahead.
Housing is a supply and demand issue, obviously. With the deep pockets buying up and holding inventory, that's keeping the prices up. What can the government do besides buying and maybe building some units and holding on to them to curtail free entities?
Well, we've got to look at the market that has been designed, and there's certainly a supply issue. There's no question about it. We need to build more supply. But there's also a real problem with the way the market has been designed. As I mentioned earlier, it's been designed very much to make rich investors richer. There's a reason why, if you look at other OECD countries, other economically similar countries around the world, Canada has the worst problem. We have the most rapid increase in the price of housing and rent compared to other countries around the world. It's because our market has been designed very clearly and very purposefully to make rich investors richer, and has not been designed to give a family an opportunity to find a place to call home. That is something we can change. There's numbers of ways that we can change that. The taxation laws, the benefits that people have around property flipping, we can curtail that. Right now, it is clearly a market designed to make someone rich. It is not a market designed to give someone a home. That is something we have to be honest about, and we've got to tackle. You Democrats are prepared to do that. Neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives have ever mentioned any concern around the way the market has been designed. I'm concerned about that, because if that is remaining, if we keep the market the way it is, no matter how much supply we build, we'll continue to have the same problem. If we have more supply, but there continues to be a market that favors investors snapping up all that supply and monopolizing that supply, then it's not going to solve the problem. That's why we're talking about non-market solutions, because we need to address that root cause that is contributing in a significant way to the problem that we're facing in Canada, because the problem in Canada is much worse than other places in the world.
As a follow-up, you talked about jurisdiction, and we keep hearing that here all the time, that it's a provincial issue. The city says it's a provincial issue. Is it a provincial issue, or is it an all-encompassing issue? What kind of issue is it?
It is all levels of government that have to work together. And it doesn't help trying to find who to blame. That's not going to actually give a family a home. The people that I spoke with in this room just earlier, they don't care whose responsibility it is. Pointing fingers and blaming the province, and maybe the province isn't doing enough, for sure. But blaming people is not going to actually build more homes. And that's why we're saying the federal government's approach, Justin Trudeau's approach to say, oh, it's not my problem, that's not going to fix the problem. If you don't even accept any responsibility, that's not going to make things better. So what we're saying is, let's put that petty stuff aside and say, let's take what we know is true. There's a serious problem in our country. People cannot find housing. People can't find a place to call home. People are spending far too much on their rent. People can't afford the market prices for a house. This is a problem. And let's all work together towards those solutions. We've laid out 3 concrete things we could do: a housing acquisition fund, incentivizing building homes that are affordable by waiving the GST and HST, and building non-market housing so there's a real alternative that's not subject to the market, because we see that again and again. The market is scooped up by international investors who see there's an opportunity to make money in Canada. Then we're never going to be able to solve the problem if all the properties are scooped up by foreign investors. We need to be serious about this, and that's the approach we're taking.
We will now go back to Zoom for questions. My next media is Cindy Tran with the Edmonton Journal. Please go ahead.
I think you might be on mute.
Is it working now?
Yeah, it
Yes.
is. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Love technology. So as we already know, the National Housing Agency, they warned last year that the country needs to build 5.8 million homes by 2030 to restore affordability. It's not like the discussion of building more housing hasn't been at the forefront of the federal government's plan, but what isn't working right now with what they're planning to do? I think my French colleagues had already asked this, but I thought I'd ask it in English.
Well, the first problem that we have with the approach of the federal government and with Justin Trudeau is, when asked about housing, he was more interested in blaming different levels of government and saying it's not his responsibility than taking the problem seriously. That approach in and of itself is a massive problem. We're not going to solve the housing crisis if the federal government's more interested in figuring out who to blame rather than actually getting to work. That's one. Secondly, there's not the urgency required. What we're up against is a massive housing crisis, which is only getting worse and worse. Like, everyday people are thinking, how do I get a home? Parents are worried about their kids. People who have a home are saying, well, my kids are never going to be able to afford a home. What do I do? People are trying to build a life where having to force to go back to live in their parents' basements. People are trying to find a place to rent, and there's nowhere to rent. There's just nothing available. The vacancy rates are so low that no one can find a place. It is so serious that it's going to take real serious action. And that means an aggressive federal approach. So far, the federal government has really just taken a tacit, somewhat of a hands-off approach. CMHC is no longer really involved in building homes. It's more of a housing insurance provider. That's not sufficient. We need to take a very active role, build housing, build a lot of it, make sure it's affordable, make sure there's a significant portion that's non-market, really tackle the problems that we're up against and do it in a serious way, not by blaming others, but by taking this problem seriously.
Okay, and follow-up question for you. What are your thoughts on proposing a rent cap across the country? Because right now, only certain provinces have it. Alberta here doesn't have rent control. I've heard that it is a huge, huge issue among those who are living in poverty, especially the disability community, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that the rent rates are rapidly increasing, and they're getting are just completely unaffordable. And I've heard this same story in Atlantic provinces. I was in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador talking to people about housing. I heard the same stories. We hear it in Ontario, we hear it across the prairies, and we hear it in BC as well. And in the North, I was in the Northwest Territories talking about housing. So there's serious concerns. Why I'm proposing a non-market solution, not-for-profit housing, cooperative housing, is because in those cases, the rents remain affordable. If the goal of a housing project, of a building, of a townhouse, if the one that owns that is running it with the purpose of keeping people housed, and the goal is not to make profit, then the rents will be more affordable. If the goal is to make a lot of money, then you're going to continue to see rent evictions or dem evictions, where a rich developer buys a building and says, let me renovate the building, kick out the tenants, and increase the rent and make it unaffordable. Their goal is to make more and more profit. Their goal is to keep people housed. That's why we need non-market housing. And the solution, I think a big part of the solution has to be building more homes that are non-market so that we can keep the rents affordable. The Housing Acquisition Fund to transform buildings into buildings that are owned by the community so that the prices remain affordable is a big part of it. And in terms of rent control, it's something we can absolutely look at. It's something that some provinces put in place, and it has worked in some places to keep rent affordable, but it's not a solution on its own. We need to build more homes. We need to build more homes rapidly, and we need to build more homes that are not in the market. So not-for-profit, cooperative, community-based.
We are now going to go to Mickey with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I was just wondering, does the federal government, does the federal NDP support a net zero electricity, the federal government's net zero electricity regulations to have a net zero grid by 2035?
Oh, we want to see massive investments in renewable energy. I should point out that the moratorium that has been proposed by the Premier Smith here in Alberta is ridiculous, to be blunt. If there's a project that could create jobs, that could create more opportunities for work, that could give people good wages, why shut that down? We should be building more projects that are renewable. And we absolutely need to build a grid across the country that brings down our emissions. We also need to bring down the cost of electricity. So what we've been talking about for a long time in the New Democratic Party is building an electrical grid that connects some of the low-cost, clean energy, sustainable energy from other provinces and the lower cost energy from other provinces and bring them to other areas that don't have it. We could be building a national grid. That is the job of a federal government, to connect provinces like Manitoba that has surplus hydroelectric energy, Quebec, which has surplus hydroelectric energy, and connect that to provinces that don't have that. BC also has significant hydroelectric energy, which is low emissions and low cost. We can do a lot better job of connecting grids, and the federal government should be investing in the infrastructure, not just setting rules, but also building infrastructure so that we can actually see benefits to provinces.
What about the target date of 2035, though? Because the Saskatchewan NDP have said it's, unrealistic for their province. Alberta NDP do support the 2035 target. Where does the federal NDP stand, or is it difficult to stand with a certain target date because of different electorate that the federal and provincial NDP face?
Well, I think the approach often with the Liberal government is to set a target, but actually not have a plan to achieve it. And the problem is that they don't acknowledge the challenges that different provinces face, and they're not really putting in place the framework to make it happen. So a plan is, or setting a target is fine, but if there's no plan to achieve it, what's the point? What we're talking about is making sure we provide real investments in infrastructure so provinces have an alternative. If we say we want to achieve a result where we reduce our emissions, but provinces have no other way to produce electricity, how is that helping us bring down our emissions? How is that solving the problem? It's not. So what we want to see happen is giving real opportunities and real alternatives by building a national grid, which can allow provinces to access lower cost energy that is renewable and sustainable so they can meet targets. We need to have a plan to achieve our targets, not what the Liberals have done for years and years, is set targets and then just break them. That's not helping us fight the climate crisis. That's not helping us reduce our emissions. And that's not helping people have affordable energy. We can do that, though, if we make the right investments.
Nous allons maintenant à Émilie Bergeron avec la presse canadienne. C'est à vous.
Bonjour, M. Singh. Avez-vous reçu, concernant une enquête publique sur l'ingérence étrangère, avez-vous reçu des libéraux une proposition de juge qui pourrait présider cette commission et êtes-vous d'accord avec la proposition de personne?
Donc, depuis le début, c'était nous, le Parti néo-démocrate, qui poussait pour avoir une enquête publique. C'était nous qui ont mis de l'avant la Chambre de communes une motion et on a réussi à une vote pour avoir une enquête publique. Donc, à ce moment, les négociations sont le résultat de notre travail. Et j'ai donné la responsabilité de ces négociations à mon leader en chambre, Peter Julian. Les négociations continuent. On reste optimiste, mais prudent qu'on va avoir une enquête publique. Mais les conversations continuent et les négociations continuent. Ça inclut les détails de l'enquête et aussi le juge qui va gérer l'enquête aussi.
Ça fait quand même plusieurs mois qu'on entend publiquement de vous, de différents leaders de partis, que les discussions avancent. On entend qu'il y a de l'optimisme, qu'il va y avoir une entente, mais ça fait quand même plusieurs mois. À quel moment vous allez vous dire c'est trop long? Si, par exemple, d'ici la fin de l'été, il n'y a pas d'entente, est-ce que à quel moment vous allez dire c'est trop long et dire on va remettre en cause notre entente avec les libéraux à condition là, que vous déclenchez une enquête? À quel moment votre patience va s'effriter?
Nos efforts ont fonctionné jusqu'à ce moment. On a forcé des votes, on a mis la pression et à cause de nos pressions, on a enlevé le rapporteur spécial. C'était notre pression avec une motion dans la Chambre qu'on a déclenchée. On a mis cette motion dans la Chambre de communes. Donc, on reste optimiste parce que les négociations continuent. Si on arrive à un moment où les négociations arrêtent, on va vous donner des autres alternatives, mais à ce moment, les négociations continuent.
We will now go to Mackenzie Gray with Global. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Singh. The Bank of Canada has recently said that high immigration levels...
Mackenzie, if you could just start from the beginning. I missed the beginning start of your question.
Yeah, no problem. The Bank of Canada has recently said that high immigration levels have played a part in increased house prices. Would you support a reduction in immigration to help bring house prices down while your plan builds more houses?
What we've said before, and I maintain this, is that while we absolutely need immigration, there's no question about it. You speak to any small town and speak to any business owner that we need immigration to keep our economy going. There's no question about it. We do need to make sure that our immigration people that are coming to our country are also able to build a good life for themselves, find a home, have sufficient resources. And so far, it doesn't seem like the federal government's doing a good job of that. We've seen some really heartbreaking examples in Toronto where refugees welcome to Canada ended up on the streets. I mean, that's completely wrong. That should not be happening. So we need to have a better approach to our immigration system that matches the needs of our country, which there are many, and that ensures that we've got adequate resources to house and to support those that are coming to our country. So I think the federal government's not done a good job of that so far, and we need to improve our matching of the needs and ensuring that people can come to Canada, and also making sure that we've got sufficient resources to welcome them.
At this point in time, though, everyone is in agreement, regardless of what party you're in, that we don't have enough houses for the people we have here, let alone the folks we're bringing in. So to build that appropriate match between the needs and the number of people, are you saying that there should be a reduction in immigration, at least at a temporary level, to let that come together?
Well, there certainly needs to be a better match. So the way that's done and the way that that's achieved, I'm flexible on achieving that, but we certainly need a better match. And it's clear that we're not doing enough to invest in resources. It might mean, instead of reducing numbers, that we just need to massively and rapidly start building more infrastructure. Like we need also to make sure our economy is churning, that we've got good opportunities for work. So the other option is to build more homes rapidly. So, and we also need to make sure that the immigration we bring in helps us achieve that result. One of the concerns I've heard from people is that there's not enough people in the trades that we need to build the homes. So we certainly need to look at this in a thoughtful way. My goal is we need to match immigration with resources. We need immigration, and we need to make sure there's sufficient resources to welcome people coming in. The way we do that has to be in a measured way, and I don't want to suggest suggest a path that actually undermines the goal that I have. And that's why I'm saying we've got to match those needs, and we can do that. I think the federal government can do a much better job of building homes that are affordable, of investing in infrastructure, of welcoming new Canadians, so that we can utilize their contributions to our country. And I think there's a mismatch going on right now.
Next, we have Tom Perry with the CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. I'd like to ask you, the second anniversary of the fall of Kabul is coming up this week. The government says that it's close to reaching its goal of bringing in 40,000 Afghans, but it's not there yet. So I'm wondering if you think that 40,000 figure should be expanded, by how much, and how would you like to see the government speed up processing to bring more Afghans in?
What we said from the beginning on this file is that there are people in Afghanistan that put their lives and their families' lives on the line to support our forces, to support Canadians, and they had not made it to Canada. We've heard really heartbreaking examples of that, and really sad stories about people from Afghanistan whose family are left behind, people themselves who are still in direct peril. That's something that we wanted to see prioritized, to make sure that those families and those individuals are supported. And to date, that goal has not been met. So that would be the first priority I would have. On this file, I know that I luckily have my critic for foreign affairs, Heather, here. So I'll ask Heather to just add more detail on that question.
Thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are coming up to this anniversary, this very, very sad anniversary. And we are sitting at a time where in Afghanistan right now, women and girls aren't in school. You know, they're closing beauty salons, the one place where women were able to make income. The attacks on women and girls in Afghanistan right now is horrifying. And what we've seen from the government is slow inaction on making sure that the most vulnerable can get to safety. I'm talking about members of parliament, the Afghan members of parliament who are women, women journalists, women who have stood up for the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. We have not helped get to safety in Canada. It's a massive problem. It took 2 years for this government to bring forward legislation so that Canadian organizations could provide life-saving support in Afghanistan. You know, we have 90 million people that are food insecure in that country at the moment, and it took 2 years for that legislation to come forward, and that legislation didn't adhere to international law. So needed to be fixed by New Democrats and needed to be revised. The government needs to urgently act to bring those whose lives are at risk in Afghanistan to Canada. We have an obligation to those who helped us. We have an obligation to those women who stood up for the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, whose lives are at risk. And that's something that I think the government needs to act much, much more urgently. And hopefully this terrible and very sad anniversary will be a moment in time where the government can step up and be spurred into taking that action they should have taken some time ago.
Can you talk about, like, specifically what kind of action you'd like to see the government taking? Is it, I don't know, deploying aircraft? Is it speeding up the bureaucracy? What is it you want to see happen to make sure that people get here faster?
Well, first of all, right now, we've been working in a cross-party group for now months and months to bring 8 members of parliament, female members of parliament, to Canada. The government has promised time and time again that they're taking action on that, and they have done nothing. In fact, one of the worst days of my life as a parliamentarian was getting that call that one of those members of parliament had been murdered by the Taliban. So that's one thing. Right now, get those folks here. You know, look at the reality of these people that are working on the ground. Make sure that we understand you can't ask people to get biometrics testing done in Afghanistan right now. That is a death sentence. You need to get them here. We can check the security. We can do some of that work once they get here, but we need to get them here. We need to get them safe. That's some of those very urgent things that can happen. We have people that are sitting outside the House of Commons in Ottawa whose family members have not been able to come. So we need to make sure if those family members of people who supported the Canadian military, the Canadian government, those people need to be brought to safety. They risked their lives to help us. The least we can do is ensure that the path for them to come is easier. The path is available. Don't ask them to find paperwork that they don't have. Don't ask them to do biometrics that they can't get done there. We can worry about those things when they get here, when they're safe.
La dernière question va Boris Proulx avec Le Devoir. C'est à vous.
Merci. Bonjour, M. Singh. Ma question est en matière d'environnement. Le Parti libéral du Canada a promis de planter 2 milliards d'arbres pour 2031. Ça vient avec un financement de 3 milliards de dollars. Pensez-vous que le gouvernement remplit sa promesse quand il dit qu'il compte dans son calcul des dizaines de millions d'arbres plantés par d'autres programmes qui ne comptent pas dans le financement de 3 milliards de dollars?
Non, pas du tout. Et leur promesse, c'était une faillite. C'est une bonne idée d'avoir plus d'arbres, c'est quelque chose de positif, mais c'est un autre exemple de brisé par ce gouvernement libéral, particulièrement concernant l'environnement. Dans une situation où on a des feux de forêt désastreuses, dans un contexte où on a un changement climatique horrible, les promesses concernant l'environnement, les promesses d'agir sont vraiment importantes. Toutes les promesses sont importantes, mais c'est un autre exemple d'une promesse brisée et un gouvernement libéral et un premier ministre Justin Trudeau qui essaie de trouver des excuses et de trouver des autres façons d'ignorer le fait qu'ils ont brisé leurs promesses.
Merci. Et en suivi, vous avez des points spécifiques sur l'environnement et le changement climatique dans votre entente avec le Parti libéral. Mais ça ne vient pas avec des critères clairs, disons, ou chiffrables, des objectifs où on peut dire c'est réalisé ou non. Comment est-ce que vous attendez à pouvoir faire un bilan, disons, de votre entente avec les libéraux pour savoir si c'est réussi ou si ce n'est pas réussi, si on manque de clarté, disons, dans les chiffres ou dans les éléments chiffrables de l'entente?
On peut montrer avec des clarités les éléments qu'on a réussi. On a forcé le gouvernement pour la première fois de lier les investissements pour l'énergie propre avec des bons salaires, des bons travails et avec des apprentissages. Ça, c'est la première fois qu'on a lié les investissements fédéraux avec une garantie, une strings attached, comme on dit en anglais, et on a réussi à accomplir ça. Deuxièmement, on a forcé le gouvernement dans l'entente d'annuler les subventions aux entreprises pétrolières. Et puis, le gouvernement a annoncé un encadrement, un framework pour enlever ces subventions. Donc, c'est une réussite partielle. Et on peut dire que c'est un exemple d'un gouvernement libéral qui n'est pas sérieux quand on parle de l'environnement, mais on peut montrer que c'est un exemple de quelque chose qu'on a accompli. Avec les projets de loi sur les travails durables, on a réussi à inclure les travailleurs, les syndicats sur la table dans les négociations. Donc, c'est un autre exemple de quelque chose qu'on a accompli. Donc, on peut montrer des éléments dans l'entente et comment on a forcé le gouvernement d'agir mais finalement, si le gouvernement n'agit pas pour protéger l'environnement, c'est le gouvernement libéral qui est coupable. C'est ce gouvernement libéral et ce Premier ministre qui brise les promesses, mais on continue d'essayer de forcer ce gouvernement d'agir pour rendre la vie plus abordable, pour protéger l'environnement, pour augmenter notre système de santé avec les soins dentaires. Donc, on a montré avec des éléments clés et clairs comment on a utilisé notre pouvoir pour améliorer les vies des gens.
So we have time for one last question in person. Please go ahead.
Rentals accounted for 15% of the revenues that came from the housing sector. Do you think short-term rentals like Airbnbs are having an impact when it comes to housing affordability or availability or even exploitation?
I think they're one part of the problem, absolutely. And again, with housing, there isn't one silver bullet. There isn't one specific thing that we need to address. It's really a comprehensive approach we have to take. And so short-term rentals are certainly a part of the problem because that short-term rental could have been a long-term place for someone to call home. And so that is a part of the problem. But there are a myriad of concerns, and that's why our approach is really comprehensive. We're looking at a number of areas, building more supply, building the right type of supply, building rental specifically. One thing that we notice in other countries that where we have affordable housing is that there's a significant portion of rental housing in the market. We compared about 8 other countries in Europe, and they have about 20% of their housing market, which is rental, purpose-built rental. In Canada, it's about 4%. So it's quite low. That's a big problem. So we need more rental that's affordable. We need more non-market. Again, that's something that the Liberals and the Conservatives are not mentioning, but it is impossible for even someone earning a good salary, coming out of university, getting into a trade, to find a place to rent or to buy if we're looking at market rents or market cost of housing. It's just not possible. So then we need an alternative. And we really mean it when we say we've got to have this broad approach, looking at all the areas that are problematic and coming up with this comprehensive solution. But I have to acknowledge that short-term rentals are also part of the problem. We need to ensure that there are long-term places for people to call home. And I would acknowledge that as a problem as well.
Alors, ceci conclut notre conférence de presse. This concludes our press conference. Merci. Thank you.
Merci. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thanks again to Blake and to Heather and to everyone who attended the press conference. Thank you.
Wow.
Wonderful. Okay.